The hot July sun beat down mercilessly on Emma Montgomery's bare neck as she stood shackled in the dusty jail yard of Redemption Springs. Her wedding dress now a filthy, tattered mockery of what should have been the happiest day of her life. Sweat trickled between her shoulder blades, but she refused to give the gawking townsfolk the satisfaction of seeing her break. 3 days she'd been chained like an animal in this yard, displayed like some carnival curiosity for a crime she hadn't committed. It was 1878, and justice in the Wyoming territory moved according to the whims of men with power and grudges. Emma had plenty of the latter aimed at her, courtesy of the town's corrupt mayor and his jilted son. "Water for the prisoner," announced Deputy Mills, approaching with a ladle. His eyes held a flicker of sympathy, but not enough to risk his position by speaking against the sham trial that had landed her here. Emma's parched lips accepted the cool liquid gratefully. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice hoarse from disuse and the dry air. "Don't thank me," the deputy muttered. "Sheriff says you'll be sold to cover your debts tomorrow if no one pays the fine." She closed her eyes against the horror of his words. The fine was outrageous $500 for allegedly stealing Mayor Hopkins' prized pocket watch. A watch she knew for a fact remained in the possession of his drunken son, who had tried to force himself on her the night before her wedding. Her intended, Charles Wilson, had abandoned her at the first sign of trouble. "Can't marry a thief, Emma," he'd said, not even bothering to lower his voice as the sheriff dragged her away from the church steps. 6 years of courtship erased in an instant. The sound of approaching hooves drew her attention to the road leading into town. A lone rider appeared through the heat-warped horizon, tall in the saddle of a magnificent chestnut stallion. As he drew closer, Emma could see he wore no badge, but carried himself with the unmistakable confidence of a man who knew how to handle trouble. The stranger dismounted in front of the jail, dust clouding around his worn leather boots. His face remained shadowed beneath a wide-brimmed hat, but she could feel his eyes assessing the unusual sight of a woman in chains. "Mighty peculiar way to treat a lady," he commented, his voice deep with a hint of a southern drawl. Deputy Mills straightened. "Town business, mister. Nothing that concerns drifters." The stranger removed his hat, revealing a sun-weathered face with striking blue eyes and a strong jaw darkened by several days' worth of stubble. He was younger than Emma had first thought, perhaps 30, with sandy brown hair that curled slightly at the nape of his neck. "Name's Reese Yates," he said, ignoring the deputy's dismissal. "And I make it my business when I see a woman chained up like a rabid wolf." He turned his attention to Emma. "What's your crime, madam?" Before she could answer, Sheriff Thornton emerged from the jailhouse, hand resting meaningfully on his holster. "This is a legal detention, stranger. Miss Montgomery here was caught stealing from our esteemed mayor. Trial's been held, sentence passed. Unless you're here to pay her fine, I suggest you move along." Emma watched as the stranger Reese studied her face carefully. Whatever he saw there made his jaw tighten. "How much?" he asked simply. Sheriff Thornton laughed. $500 plus court costs." To Emma's astonishment, Reese Yates didn't flinch at the exorbitant sum. Instead, he reached into his saddlebag and withdrew a leather pouch. "I'll need a receipt," he said calmly, "and those chains removed immediately." The sheriff's mouth fell open. "Now wait just a minute." "You can't just—" "I believe that's exactly how your law works, isn't it?" Reese interrupted. "Fines paid, prisoner goes free, unless there's some other Redemption Springs statute I'm not aware of." A small crowd had gathered, townsfolk whispering among themselves as they watched the confrontation unfold. Emma hardly dared breathe as the sheriff's face darkened with anger. "You got no idea what you're involving yourself in," Thornton growled. Reese counted out gold coins onto the sheriff's desk. 550. That should cover your court costs. He turned to Emma. Miss Montgomery, I believe you're free to go now. The sheriff looked like he might protest further, but the presence of witnesses and the substantial amount of gold seemed to change his mind. With obvious reluctance, he nodded to Deputy Mills, who approached with the key to Emma's shackles. The iron cuffs fell away, revealing raw, reddened skin beneath. Emma rubbed her wrists, overwhelmed by the sudden turn of events and wary of this unexpected savior. "Why would you do this?" she asked as Reese Yates guided her toward his horse. "You don't know me." "Let's just say I recognize a frame-up when I see one," he replied quietly. "And I've got a particular dislike for men who abuse their power." He helped her onto his horse before mounting behind her. "Hold tight, Miss Montgomery. We're leaving town." Emma hesitated only a moment before gripping the saddle horn. Behind them, she could hear the sheriff shouting something, but the words were lost as Reese urged his horse into a gallop, carrying them both beyond the town limits and away from the nightmare of the past 3 days. The chestnut stallion ate up the miles, its powerful stride putting distance between them and Redemption Springs. Emma sat rigid in the saddle, acutely aware of the stranger's chest against her back, his arms reaching around her to hold the reins. The tattered remains of her wedding dress fluttered in the wind as they rode, a painful reminder of her shattered dreams. "Where are you taking me?" she finally asked when Reese slowed the horse to a walk, giving the animal a chance to recover from the hard gallop. "Somewhere safe," he answered, scanning the horizon with practiced eyes. "We need to put more distance between us and that town before nightfall. Sheriff Thornton struck me as the type who might change his mind about letting you go." Emma twisted slightly to look at him. "You just spent a small fortune on a woman you've never met. I'd like to know why." A shadow crossed his face. "Let's just say I've seen what happens when justice gets twisted by powerful men. I couldn't ride past and do nothing." He paused. "Besides, no bride should be in shackles on what was meant to be her wedding day." The mention of her wedding sent a fresh wave of pain through Emma. "My wedding was 3 days ago. While I stood chained in that yard, my intended was likely consoling himself with whiskey and a willing saloon girl." "His loss," Reese said simply. "Any man who abandons his bride at the first sign of trouble isn't worth the heartache." They rode in silence for a time, the rhythmic motion of the horse lulling Emma into an exhausted daze. 3 days of standing in the blistering sun with minimal water and food had taken their toll. She must have dozed off, for she suddenly found herself slipping sideways in the saddle. Strong arms caught and steadied her. "Whoa there," Reese murmured. "Let's take a break. You need water and rest." He guided the horse toward a small copse of trees alongside a narrow stream. The shade was a blessed relief after days under the merciless sun. Reese dismounted first, then reached up to help Emma down. Her legs buckled as soon as her feet touched the ground, and he caught her before she could fall. "Easy," he said, concern evident in his voice. "When was the last time you ate or drank properly?" Emma tried to recall. "They gave me water twice a day, no food since the morning of my wedding." Anger flashed across Reese's face. "Bastards," he muttered, helping her to sit beneath a cottonwood tree. He retrieved a canteen and a small bundle wrapped in cloth from his saddlebags. "Drink slowly," he instructed, offering her the water. "Too much at once will make you sick." The water was cool and sweet on her parched tongue. Emma forced herself to sip rather than gulp, watching as Reese unwrapped the bundle to reveal jerky and hardtack. "It's not much," he apologized, "but it'll keep you going until we reach better accommodations." Emma accepted a piece of jerky with trembling fingers. "Thank you, Mr. Yates. I—" She paused, her voice catching. I don't know how I'll ever repay you, Reese, he corrected gently. And there's no debt between us. I couldn't leave you there, that's all there is to it. As Emma ate, she studied her rescuer more carefully. Reese Yates moved with the easy confidence of a man comfortable in the wilderness, but there was something in his manner that suggested he hadn't always been a drifter. His speech was educated, his actions deliberate. "Where are we headed?" she asked after finishing the modest meal. "There's a small ranch about 20 miles north of here," Reese replied, checking his horse's hooves for stones. "Belongs to an old friend of mine. We should reach it by nightfall if we push on soon." Emma glanced down at her filthy, torn wedding dress. "I'm hardly presentable for calling on friends." A smile tugged at the corner of Reese's mouth. "Marjorie Sullivan won't mind. She's got 3 daughters and keeps clothes for every size and occasion. More importantly, she's got a sturdy house with a lock on the door, and her husband Tom is handy with a rifle. You think the sheriff will come after us?" Reese's expression turned serious. "I think you were being held for reasons that had nothing to do with a pocket watch. Men like Mayor Hopkins don't take kindly to having their plans disrupted." Emma looked away, twisting the simple gold band that still adorned her finger, a remnant of the ceremony that never happened. "The mayor's son, Elijah, he tried to force himself on me the night before the wedding. I fought him off, but he was drunk and angry. Said if I wouldn't give him what he wanted willingly, he'd find another way to have me." Reese's jaw tightened. "And the theft accusation was his revenge. The watch was his father's prized possession, a gift from President Grant himself during the war. Elijah knew exactly what to take to ensure I'd face the harshest punishment." She laughed bitterly. "What he didn't count on was a stranger with more decency than the entire town of Redemption Springs combined." "There are still good people in that town," Reese said quietly. "They're just afraid. Fear makes people look the other way when they should stand up." "How can you be so sure?" "Because I've seen it before." He helped Emma to her feet. "We should move on if we want to reach the Sullivans by nightfall." As they continued their journey, Emma's thoughts swirled with questions about her mysterious rescuer. What had brought Reese Yates to Redemption Springs at precisely the right moment? And what kind of man carried enough gold to pay such an extravagant fine without hesitation? The afternoon sun was beginning its descent when they crested a hill, and Emma caught sight of a modest ranch nestled in a green valley below. Smoke curled invitingly from the chimney, and she could make out the shapes of cattle grazing in nearby pastures. "Sullivan Ranch," Reese announced. "One of the few honest spreads in this part of Wyoming." As they approached, a man emerged from the barn, rifle in hand. He squinted up at them before breaking into a wide grin. "Well, I'll be damned. Reese Yates as I live and breathe." He lowered the rifle and strode toward them as Reese dismounted and helped Emma down. "What brings you two?" The man stopped short when he got a good look at Emma in her bedraggled wedding dress. "Looks like you've got a story to tell." "Tom," Reese clasped the man's hand firmly. "This is Miss Emma Montgomery. She's had a rough few days and needs safe harbor." Tom Sullivan's keen eyes took in Emma's condition, the sunburn on her face and neck, the raw marks on her wrists, the tattered white dress. "Marjorie," he called toward the house. "Set 2 more places for supper and heat up some extra bathwater." A sturdy woman with graying hair pulled back in a severe bun appeared on the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. Her expression of surprise quickly shifted to one of maternal concern when she spotted Emma. "Good heavens!" she exclaimed, hurrying down the steps. "You poor dear. Come inside this instant." Before Emma knew what was happening, she was whisked into the warmth of the Sullivan home, Marjorie's capable hands guiding her toward a bedroom where a copper tub was soon filled with steaming water. "You just soak away those troubles, honey," Marjorie instructed, laying out a clean dress and undergarments. "We'll have some food ready when you're done. Don't you worry about a thing now." Left alone, Emma sank gratefully into the hot water, wincing as it touched her raw wrists and sunburned skin. For the first time in days, tears welled in her eyes and spilled down her cheeks, not from pain or fear, but from the simple kindness of strangers. By the time she emerged from the bedroom, dressed in a borrowed blue calico that was slightly too large but blessedly clean, the Sullivan family and Reese were seated around a long table laden with food. Three young women, presumably, the Sullivan daughters, looked up with undisguised curiosity. "There she is," Marjorie said warmly. "Come sit by me, dear. You must be famished." Emma slid into the offered chair, acutely aware of Reese's gaze from across the table. His expression was unreadable, but something in his eyes made her heart beat faster. Tom cleared his throat. "Reese has given us the broad strokes of your situation, Miss Montgomery. You're welcome to stay with us as long as you need." "That's very kind," Emma replied, overwhelmed by their generosity. "But I wouldn't want to impose or bring trouble to your door." "Nonsense," Marjorie declared, heaping Emma's plate with roast beef and potatoes. "The Hopkinses have been trying to drive decent folk out of this territory for years. About time someone stood up to them." The oldest Sullivan daughter, introduced as Sarah, leaned forward eagerly. "Is it true you were left at the altar and then framed for theft, Sarah?" Marjorie scolded. "Where are your manners?" Emma managed a small smile. "It's all right. And yes, more or less, though I never quite made it to the altar," the sheriff interrupted before we could exchange vows. "What will you do now?" asked the middle daughter, Mary. It was a question Emma had been avoiding. With no family in the territory and her reputation in tatters, her options were severely limited. "I'm not sure," she admitted. "I was teaching at the school in Redemption Springs, but that position is surely lost to me now." "You're a teacher." Reese spoke for the first time since she'd entered the room. Emma nodded. "For 3 years. I came west from Boston after my parents died." Teaching was one of the few respectable positions open to a woman alone. "Well now," Tom said thoughtfully, "that's interesting timing. The schoolteacher over in Pine Creek just eloped with a cattle buyer last month. Town's been scrambling to find a replacement before the fall term." Hope flickered briefly in Emma's chest, then faded. "Pine Creek is only 30 miles from Redemption Springs. Word of my crime will have reached there by now." "Not necessarily," Reese countered. "Pine Creek folks don't have much to do with Redemption Springs. Bad blood over water rights going back years. And they're desperate enough that they might not ask too many questions," Tom added. "Especially if you had a recommendation from respectable ranchers like us." Emma looked from Tom to Marjorie, touched by their willingness to vouch for a woman they'd just met. "Why would you do that for me?" "Because Reese brought you here," Marjorie said simply. "And in 20 years, I've never known him to misjudge a person's character." After supper, while the Sullivan daughters cleared the table, Tom pulled out a map and spread it across the table. "Pine Creek's here," he explained, pointing to a spot north of their location. "It's a growing town, got a new silver mine opening up in the hills nearby. Lot of families moving in, which means they need a proper school." Emma studied the map, noting that Pine Creek was indeed in the opposite direction from Redemption Springs. "It sounds promising," she admitted, though anxiety still gnawed at her. "But I have nothing, no clothes, no teaching materials, not even a penny to my name." "We can help with that," Marjorie assured her. "The girls and I have fabric and can outfit you with enough to get started." "Tom keeps a small emergency fund, don't you look at me that way, Thomas Sullivan. The Lord helps those who help others." Reese, who had been silent during this exchange, finally spoke. I'll escort you to Pine Creek, Miss Montgomery. Make sure you arrive safely and get settled." Emma glanced at him, surprised by the offer. "You've already done more than enough, Mr. Yates. I couldn't ask for more of your time." "You didn't ask," he pointed out. "I offered. Besides, I have business in that direction." Something in his tone made Emma wonder if this business had conveniently materialized in the last few hours, but she didn't press the matter. The thought of traveling alone, even the relatively short distance to Pine Creek, filled her with dread. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything." Later that evening, after the Sullivan household had retired for the night, Emma found herself unable to sleep despite her exhaustion. The events of the past days kept replaying in her mind: Charles's betrayal, the mockery of a trial, the humiliation of standing chained in the town square, and finally, the unexpected arrival of Reese Yates. She slipped from her bed and wrapped a borrowed shawl around her shoulders before quietly making her way to the porch. The night air was cool, a welcome change from the stifling heat of the jail yard. Stars blanketed the sky, brighter than she'd ever seen them. "Couldn't sleep." Reese's voice came from the shadows, startling her. Emma turned to find him seated on a bench at the far end of the porch, a cigarette glowing faintly between his fingers. "I didn't mean to disturb you," she apologized. "You didn't." He shifted to make room for her on the bench. "Seems neither of us is finding rest tonight." After a moment's hesitation, Emma joined him, careful to maintain a proper distance. "I keep thinking about how differently today might have ended if you hadn't come along." Reese exhaled a stream of smoke into the night air. "Best not to dwell on what might have been." "Is that how you live? Never looking back?" "Looking back has its uses," he replied. "Helps avoid making the same mistakes twice, but dwelling on the past, that's a quicksand that can swallow a person whole." Emma studied his profile in the dim light. "You speak from experience." He was quiet for so long that she thought he might not answer. "I was a U.S. Marshal," he finally said. "For 7 years after the war, saw enough injustice in that time to last several lifetimes." "But you're not a marshal now," Emma observed. "No." His voice held a finality that discouraged further questions on that subject. He changed course instead. "Tell me about Boston. What brought you west?" Emma accepted the shift in conversation. "My father was a professor at Harvard. When he and my mother died of influenza within days of each other, I found myself alone with no prospects and very little money. The family home went to pay their debts, and no respectable Boston family wanted an orphaned spinster of 23 as a governess." "So you answered an advertisement for a teacher in Wyoming territory," Reese guessed. "I did. It seemed an adventure, and I had nothing to lose." She laughed softly. "I arrived in Redemption Springs with one trunk of books and clothes, ready to shape young minds in the wilderness." "And you met your fiancé there," Emma nodded, twisting the gold band she still wore. "Charles Wilson owned the general store. He was kind, stable, respectable. After 2 years of courtship, he proposed, and I accepted. It wasn't a grand passion, but I thought it was enough." "Until he abandoned you at the first sign of trouble," Reese said, a hint of anger in his tone. "I keep thinking about what might have happened if we had managed to exchange vows before the sheriff arrived," Emma mused. "Would Charles have stood by me then? Or would he have found some way to dissolve the marriage? A man who truly loves a woman stands by her regardless of the timing," Reese said firmly. "Vows or no vows," Emma found herself blinking back tears. "I've been such a fool." Reese reached out, his hand hovering near hers before retreating. "You trusted someone who proved unworthy of that trust. That doesn't make you a fool, it makes him a coward." They sat in companionable silence for a while, the night sounds of the ranch cattle lowing in the distance, the occasional whinny of horses in the barn washing over them. "We should try to get some rest," Reese finally said. "Tom says it's a full day's ride to Pine Creek, and we'll want to start early." Emma nodded, reluctant to end their conversation but aware of the wisdom in his words. As she rose to go inside, she paused. "Mr. Yates, Reese, I don't believe in coincidences. What really brought you to Redemption Springs yesterday?" In the faint moonlight, she saw his mouth quirk into a half-smile. "Another time, Miss Montgomery. That's a story for another time." The following morning dawned clear and crisp, with the promise of another hot day to come. Emma joined the Sullivan family for a hearty breakfast, touched by the efforts they had made on her behalf. Marjorie and her daughters had packed a small trunk with essential clothing, while Tom had written a glowing letter of recommendation for the Pine Creek Town Council. "The trunk can go on our spare pack horse," Tom explained as they finished their meal. "I'm sending along some supplies for you as well should tide you over until you receive your first wages." Emma's throat tightened with emotion. "I don't know how to thank you all." "You can thank us by writing once you're settled," Marjorie said firmly. "And by remembering there are good people in this world, despite what you've experienced recently." By mid-morning, Emma and Reese were ready to depart. The Sullivan family gathered in the yard to see them off, the girls extracting promises from Emma to write with all the details of her new life. "The town council meets on Thursdays," Tom informed them as Reese helped Emma mount a gentle mare they'd lent her. "You should arrive in time to present yourself tomorrow afternoon." "We'll make it," Reese assured him, clasping Tom's hand. "Thank you, old friend." As they rode away from the ranch, Emma felt a curious mixture of gratitude and apprehension. In the space of 2 days, her life had been completely upended again. Yet something about Reese Yates's solid presence beside her gave her courage to face whatever lay ahead. They rode at a steady pace through rolling grasslands dotted with stands of cottonwood and pine. Reese proved to be a companionable traveling partner, pointing out landmarks and sharing stories of his time in the territory. By unspoken agreement, they avoided discussing Redemption Springs or the circumstances that had brought them together. Around midday, they stopped by a clear stream to rest the horses and eat the lunch Marjorie had packed. Emma stretched her legs, trying to ignore the ache in muscles unaccustomed to hours in the saddle. "How are you holding up?" Reese asked, noticing her discomfort. "I'll survive," she replied with a rueful smile. "Though I may not be able to walk properly for days." He chuckled. "It gets easier. The Sullivans chose a good mount for you ladies, one of the smoothest gaited mares I've ridden." They sat on a fallen log, sharing bread, cheese, and apples in comfortable silence. Emma found herself studying Reese when he wasn't looking, the way his hands moved with efficient grace, the lines at the corners of his eyes that deepened when he smiled, the watchful alertness that never quite left him even in these peaceful surroundings. "Tell me about being a marshal," she said suddenly. "If you don't mind." Reese considered her request, taking his time to answer. "It was a job that showed me the best and worst of humanity, often in the same day." He pulled out his cigarette makings, his fingers automatically rolling the paper. "I joined up after Appomattox. Spent 4 years in the war, came home to find my family's farm in Tennessee taken for taxes. Seemed as good a path as any." "You must have been very young during the war," Emma observed. 18 when I enlisted in 61. 22 when it ended." "Felt a hell of a lot older, though." He lit his cigarette. "The marshals were expanding west, needed men who could handle themselves in rough country. I fit the bill." "And you were good at it." A shadow crossed his face. "Too good, some might say." "Made a name for myself tracking outlaws through territories other lawmen wouldn't enter. Brought in my share of wanted men, some alive, some not. "What made you leave?" Emma asked, sensing they were approaching the heart of what defined Reese Yates. He was quiet for a long moment, staring at the stream. 2 years ago, I was assigned to bring in a man named James Blackwell, bank robber, suspected of killing a teller during a holdup in Kansas City. I tracked him to a small homestead in Nebraska, found him living with a wife and young son. Reese's jaw tightened. He swore he was innocent, that he'd been framed by his former partner. His wife begged me to listen. "Did you?" "No." The word hung heavy between them. "I had my orders. Evidence seemed clear-cut. I brought him in to stand trial." 3 months later, he was hanged a week before his former partner was caught with the stolen money and confessed to the murder. Emma's hand flew to her mouth. "Oh, Reese. I went to tell his widow. Least I could do." His voice had gone flat, emotionless. "Found her and the boy living in squalor, ostracized by their neighbors. She wouldn't take a penny from me. Said money couldn't bring back her husband or give her son a father." He crushed out his cigarette. "I turned in my badge the next day." "It wasn't your fault," Emma said softly. "You were doing your duty." "That's what my superiors said, but I knew better. I'd had doubts about Blackwell's guilt, saw inconsistencies in the evidence, but I was so damn sure of myself, so convinced of my own judgment, that I ignored those doubts." He looked at her directly. "That's why I couldn't ride past when I saw you in those chains. I recognized the look of an innocent person being sacrificed to someone else's agenda." The revelation of what had driven him to act stunned Emma into silence. His intervention hadn't been a random act of kindness, but a deliberate attempt at redemption for a past mistake. "We should get moving," Reese said, standing abruptly. "Still have a good distance to cover before nightfall." They continued their journey through the afternoon, the terrain gradually changing as they moved north. The open grasslands gave way to more varied landscape, rocky outcroppings, deeper streams, and thicker stands of pine. Reese remained vigilant, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. "Are you expecting trouble?" Emma asked after noticing him check the rifle in his saddle scabbard for the third time. "Not expecting it, but preparing for it all the same," he replied. "This is disputed territory between several ranching interests. Strangers aren't always welcome." As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, they crested a ridge and saw smoke rising from chimneys in the distance. "Pine Creek," Reese announced. "We'll make it before dark after all." Emma felt a flutter of nervousness. What if they don't want me? What if they've already found another teacher? "Then we'll figure something else out," Reese said simply. "One step at a time, Miss Montgomery." The town of Pine Creek proved to be larger than Emma had anticipated, several streets of substantial buildings radiating out from a central square, with neat houses extending beyond. A church spire dominated one end of the town, while the promised silver mine was evident from the activity on a nearby hillside. They rode directly to the town's only hotel, a 2-story building with Silver Dollar Hotel painted in fading letters across its false front. Reese dismounted first, then helped Emma down, his hands steady at her waist. "Wait here," he instructed, securing their horses to the hitching post. "Let me make sure they have suitable accommodations." Emma stood awkwardly beside the horses, acutely aware of her borrowed dress and travel-worn appearance. Several passers-by cast curious glances in her direction, but no one approached or questioned her presence. Reese emerged from the hotel a few minutes later. "They have 2 rooms available," he reported. "I've secured them for the night. The clerk says the town council indeed meets tomorrow afternoon at the courthouse. Mayor's name is Bedford, apparently well-respected and fair-minded." Relief washed over Emma. "That's promising." A young stable boy appeared to take their horses, and Reese supervised the unloading of Emma's trunk and their supplies. Once everything was settled, he escorted her into the hotel's modest lobby. "Miss Montgomery will be in room 4, he informed the clerk, a thin man with spectacles perched on the end of his nose. "I'll take room 6. Please have hot water sent up for the lady immediately." "Yes, sir, Mr. Yates," the clerk responded, eyeing them with poorly concealed curiosity. "And we'll take supper in the dining room in 1 hour," Reese added, handing Emma a key. Upstairs, Emma found a small but clean room with a narrow bed, washstand, and chest of drawers. The promised hot water arrived moments later, carried by a red-faced maid who couldn't quite meet Emma's eyes. "Is there something wrong?" Emma asked as the girl set down the steaming pitcher. "No, madam," the maid replied, hesitating. "It's just, folks are wondering if you're Mr. Yates's wife. Him taking 2 rooms and all, it's unusual." Emma felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Mr. Yates is merely escorting me to town on business. We are not. That is to say, our relationship is entirely proper." The girl looked unconvinced but curtsied before hurrying out. Emma sank onto the bed, suddenly understanding the implications of arriving in town with a male companion. If she hoped to secure the teaching position, she would need to establish her respectability immediately. After washing away the dust of travel and changing into the nicest of the dresses Marjorie had provided, a dark green calico with a lace collar, Emma made her way downstairs to the dining room. Reese was already waiting, freshly shaved and wearing a clean shirt. He stood when she approached, pulling out her chair with old-world courtesy. "You look rested," he observed as they were served bowls of steaming stew. "I feel better," she admitted, "but I've just realized we may have a problem. The hotel maid seems to think that we're married but trying to hide some sort of scandal by taking separate rooms." Reese's mouth quirked in amusement. "Small towns run on gossip. By morning, half the town will have decided you're my estranged wife, and the other half will think you're running from an unhappy marriage." "This isn't funny," Emma protested. "If I'm to have any chance at securing the teaching position, I need to appear beyond reproach. These communities entrust their children to teachers who exemplify moral character." "You're right," Reese conceded. "First thing tomorrow, we'll call on the mayor directly, explain the circumstances or a version of them that won't raise more questions than it answers." "What version would that be?" Emma asked skeptically. Reese considered. "You're a qualified teacher from the East, recently widowed, looking for a fresh start. I'm an old friend of your late husband, escorting you to ensure your safe arrival." "A complete fabrication," Emma noted. "Not complete. You are a qualified teacher from the East, and you are looking for a fresh start." He held her gaze. "Sometimes the simplest explanation is the one people are most willing to accept." Emma wasn't entirely comfortable with the deception, but she recognized the practicality of Reese's suggestion. "And what will you do after tomorrow? Assuming I secure the position." Something flickered in his eyes, an emotion she couldn't quite identify. "That depends on a number of factors," he said carefully. "For now, let's focus on getting you settled." After supper, they parted in the upstairs hallway, Reese insisting on carrying her trunk into her room. At the threshold, he paused. "Lock your door," he advised. "And if you need anything during the night, just knock on the wall. I'll hear you." "You always expect the worst?" Emma asked, struck by his constant vigilance. "I've found it's better to be prepared for the worst while hoping for the best," he replied with a slight smile. "Sleep well, Miss Montgomery." "Emma," she said impulsively. "After everything we've been through, I think you might call me Emma." His smile deepened, transforming his face. "Emma, then. Good night." "Good night, Reese." Emma slept better than she had expected, exhaustion from the journey overwhelming her various anxieties. She woke to bright sunshine streaming through the thin curtains, and the sounds of a town already busy with morning activities. After dressing in her second-best borrowed dress, a navy blue with white piping, she ventured downstairs to find Reese already at breakfast, deep in conversation with a robust man in a well-cut suit. "Ah, here she is now," Reese said, standing as Emma approached. "Emma, this is Mayor Bedford of Pine Creek. Mayor, may I present Mrs. Emma Montgomery, the teacher I mentioned." Emma barely managed to hide her surprise at the Mrs. prefix and the fact that Reese had apparently already spoken to the mayor. She extended her hand, which the mayor shook heartily. "A pleasure, Mrs. Montgomery," Mayor Bedford boomed. "Mr. Yates here has been singing your praises, says you taught in Boston before coming west. We're in desperate need of someone with your qualifications." "The pleasure is mine, Mayor Bedford," Emma replied, taking the seat Reese pulled out for her. "I understand you've been without a teacher for some time." "Nearly 2 months," the mayor confirmed, his expression growing serious. "Had 30 children with nowhere to go during school hours. Parents are at their wits' end, especially with the mine bringing in more families every week. Mr. Yates mentioned you're holding a town council meeting this afternoon," Emma said. "I'd be honored to present my credentials then." Mayor Bedford waved a dismissive hand. "No need to wait for all that formality. I've read Tom Sullivan's letter, known Tom for 15 years, and his word's as good as gold in these parts, and Mr. Yates here has vouched for your character." He beamed at her. "As far as I'm concerned, the position is yours if you want it." Emma blinked in surprise. That's very generous, Mayor Bedford. I would certainly be interested." "Excellent," the mayor clapped his hands together. "The school's been closed since Miss Winters ran off with that cattle buyer, but it's in good repair. Living quarters are attached to the back, small, but comfortable for a single lady. Salary's $40 a month, with an additional stipend for supplies." It was a better offer than Emma had dared hope for. The salary was $5 more than she'd earned in Redemption Springs, and the inclusion of living quarters meant she wouldn't have to spend precious funds on rent. "When would you like me to start?" she asked, trying to contain her excitement. "Can you be ready by Monday?" "That gives you 3 days to settle in and prepare." The mayor stood, checking his pocket watch. "I should get back to my office. Town doesn't run itself. Mrs. Montgomery, why don't you come by later today? My wife can introduce you to some of the parents, and I'll have the school keys ready for you." After the mayor departed, Emma turned to Reese in amazement. "How did you manage that?" "I merely mentioned to the hotel clerk last night that I was escorting a qualified teacher to town," Reese explained, a satisfied gleam in his eye. News travels fast in small communities. The mayor was waiting in the dining room when I came down this morning. "You introduced me as Mrs. Montgomery," she noted. "A widow commands more respect and fewer questions in these frontier towns," Reese said pragmatically. "And before you object on principle, consider that the alternative would be explaining why you were traveling unchaperoned with a man who isn't your husband or brother." Emma couldn't argue with his logic, even if the deception made her uncomfortable. "Well, it seems I'm officially the new schoolteacher of Pine Creek, thanks to your intervention. Again. You earned the position with your qualifications," Reese countered. "I merely facilitated the introduction." They finished breakfast, then spent the morning exploring the town. Pine Creek was indeed growing rapidly, with new construction evident on several streets. The general store was well stocked, the church appeared well maintained, and Emma was pleased to note a small lending library adjacent to the mayor's office. "This seems like a prosperous community," she observed as they walked. Very different from Redemption Springs. Silver has a way of bringing prosperity, Reese agreed, but it can also bring trouble if not managed properly. So far, Mayor Bedford seems to have kept things under control. They reached the schoolhouse at the edge of town, a sturdy one-room building with large windows and a small bell tower. Behind it stood a modest cabin that would serve as Emma's new home. "Shall we?" Reese gestured to the steps. The schoolhouse was unlocked, and they entered to find a clean, well-organized space with rows of desks facing a teacher's desk on a raised platform. A large blackboard covered the front wall, and bookshelves lined the back of the room. "This is lovely," Emma breathed, running her fingers along a desk. "Much better equipped than my school in Redemption Springs." They explored the attached living quarters next a single room with a curtained-off sleeping area, a small kitchen space with a cast-iron stove, and basic furniture including a table, 2 chairs, and a rocking chair by the window. "It's perfect," Emma declared, unable to contain her delight. "Small, but all I need." Reese watched her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. "You'll be comfortable here," he said finally. "Safe." The word hung between them, a reminder of what she had escaped and what he had helped her avoid. Emma's joy dimmed slightly as reality intruded. "Do you think they'll come looking for me?" she asked quietly. "The Hopkinses, I mean." "Eventually, perhaps," Reese admitted. "Men like that don't like losing what they consider theirs. But Pine Creek is outside their usual territory and they have no legal claim on you. The fine was paid in full." "But if they discover where I am?" "By then, you'll be established here," Reese assured her. "Part of the community protected by people who know your true character." Emma wanted to believe him, but doubt lingered. "And what about you? What will you do now?" The question seemed to catch him off guard. "I have some business to attend to," he said vaguely. "But I'll make sure you're properly settled before I move on." The thought of Reese leaving filled Emma with an unexpected sense of loss. In the short time since he'd freed her from those chains, he had become her protector, her guide, and she realized with a start someone she had come to care for deeply. "I see," she said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Well, I appreciate all you've done. I wouldn't be here without you." Reese seemed about to say something more when a knock at the door interrupted them. It was Mayor Bedford's wife, a plump, cheerful woman who introduced herself as Harriet. "I thought you might like a proper welcome to Pine Creek," she announced, revealing a basket filled with bread, preserves, and other essentials, "and to meet some of the mothers of your future pupils." Behind her stood 3 other women, each carrying additional items for Emma's new home. They introduced themselves as Mrs. Palmer, Mrs. Whitfield, and Mrs. Jennings, all with children of school age. "Ladies, this is very kind," Emma said, genuinely touched by the gesture. "Least we could do," Harriet Bedford replied. "We've been praying for a new teacher, and here you are, practically heaven sent." Reese quietly excused himself, saying he had errands to run in town, leaving Emma with her welcoming committee. The women set about arranging the provisions they'd brought, asking Emma questions about her teaching experience and offering advice about Pine Creek. "Mr. Yates seems very attentive," Mrs. Palmer observed when the conversation lulled. "An old family friend," the mayor mentioned. Emma felt a blush creep up her neck. "Yes, he was kind enough to escort me here after learning of my situation." "Such a handsome man," Mrs. Whitfield sighed. "And those eyes. My Judith, she's 16, nearly swooned when she saw him in town this morning." "Is he staying long?" Harriet asked, her tone carefully casual. "I don't believe so," Emma replied, trying to ignore the pang the words caused. "He has business elsewhere." The women exchanged meaningful glances that Emma pretended not to notice. By the time they departed, promising to send their children to help her prepare the schoolroom on Saturday. Emma had a better understanding of the town's social dynamics and the challenges she might face as the new teacher. She was arranging her meager belongings in the small cabin when Reese returned late in the afternoon. He knocked at the door, and when she opened it, she found him holding a package wrapped in brown paper. "A housewarming gift," he explained, stepping inside. "Of sorts." Emma unwrapped the package to find a pistol small but well crafted, with a pearl handle. "Reese, I don't know how to use this," she protested. "Which is why I'm going to teach you," he said firmly. "Tomorrow morning, before the town is fully awake. Every woman living alone should know how to protect herself, especially out here." She wanted to object further but recognized the sense in his words. "All right," she conceded, "but I hope I never have to use it." "As do I," Reese agreed. "Consider it a precaution, nothing more." They stood in awkward silence for a moment, the small cabin suddenly feeling much smaller with his tall frame filling the space. "The mayor's wife and her friends were very welcoming," Emma said, desperate to break the tension. "They've already organized helpers for preparing the schoolroom." "That's good," Reese nodded. "You'll be part of the community in no time." Another silence fell, heavier this time. "When will you leave?" Emma finally asked, the question that had been burning in her mind all day. Reese's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "I should move on by the end of the week. There's a situation in Laramie that requires attention." "I see." Emma turned away, busying herself with arranging items on her small table. "Well, I'm grateful for everything you've done. I don't know how I'll ever repay you." "There's nothing to repay," Reese said quietly. "Seeing you safe and with a fresh start is enough." She faced him again, suddenly bold. "Is it? Is that really all you want, Reese?" Something flashed in his eyes, hunger perhaps, or longing, but he quickly masked it. "What I want isn't important. What matters is what's best for you. And right now, that's establishing yourself here without complications." "And you would be a complication," Emma pressed, stepping closer. "I'm not the settling kind, Emma." His voice was rough. "I've spent the past 2 years drifting from town to town, taking odd jobs, hunting bounties when money ran low. That's no life for a woman like you." "Shouldn't I be the judge of what kind of life I want?" she challenged. Reese ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she'd come to recognize as a sign of his frustration. "You've been through hell. You're just starting to find your footing again. The last thing you need is to tie yourself to a man with my past." Before Emma could respond, another knock sounded at the door. It was the mayor, come to deliver the school keys and some additional paperwork regarding her position. By the time she'd finished with him, Reese had made his excuses and departed, leaving Emma alone with her turbulent thoughts. The following morning, true to his word, Reese appeared at her door just after dawn, the pearl-handled pistol in a small leather holster. "Ready for your lesson?" he asked, his manner professionally distant, as if their conversation of the previous evening had never happened. Emma nodded, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders against the early morning chill. They walked in silence to a clearing beyond the edge of town, where Reese had set up several bottles on a fallen log. "First rule," he said, removing the pistol from its holster. "Always treat this as if it's loaded, even when you know it isn't. Never point it at anything you don't intend to shoot." For the next hour, he patiently instructed her on loading, aiming, and firing the small weapon. Emma proved to be a quick study, hitting one of the bottles on her third attempt. "Good," Reese approved. "Now remember, this is a last resort. If trouble comes, your first priority is to get away if you can. Use this only if there's no alternative." "I understand," Emma said, carefully returning the pistol to its holster. "Though I hope Pine Creek is peaceful enough that I'll never need to test my skills." "As do I," Reese agreed, his expression softening momentarily. "But I'll sleep better knowing you can defend yourself if necessary." They walked back toward town as the sun climbed higher, burning off the morning mist. Emma was acutely aware of Reese beside her, his stride measured to match hers, his presence both reassuring and unsettling. "I've been thinking about what you said yesterday," she began hesitantly. "About being a complication." Reese's jaw tightened. "Emma, please, let me finish," she interrupted. "You're right that I'm just finding my footing again, and perhaps it would be unwise to explore whatever this is between us right now." She took a deep breath. "But I want you to know that I don't see you as a complication, Reese. I see you as the man who saved me in more ways than one." He stopped walking, turning to face her fully. For a long moment he simply looked at her, his blue eyes searching hers. "You deserve better than a drifter with blood on his hands," he said softly. "What if I don't want better?" Emma countered. "What if I want someone who understands what it means to start over? Someone who sees me, really sees me, and still believes I'm worth fighting for?" Reese's expression was agonized. "Emma, They were interrupted by the arrival of a young boy on a panting horse who reined in sharply beside them. "Mr. Yates," the boy called. "Mayor says there's a telegram for you at the office. Says it's urgent." Reese's demeanor changed instantly, his body tensing. "Thank you, son. Tell him I'm on my way." The boy wheeled his horse around and galloped back toward town. Reese turned to Emma, his expression now guarded. "I need to see what this is about," he said. "Will you be all right getting back on your own?" Emma nodded, disappointed by the interruption but sensing his concern. "Of course. I have preparations to make for Monday in any case." "I'll find you later," Reese promised before striding quickly toward town, leaving Emma to wonder what message could have caused such an immediate change in his manner. She spent the morning organizing her new schoolroom, grateful for the physical activity that kept her mind from dwelling too much on Reese and the telegram that had summoned him away. Around midday, several children arrived with their mothers to help, and Emma welcomed the distraction of meeting her future pupils. It was late afternoon before Reese appeared at the schoolhouse door. One look at his face told Emma the telegram had brought unwelcome news. "What is it?" she asked as soon as the last helper had departed. "Trouble," he replied grimly. "Sheriff Thornton and Elijah Hopkins left Redemption Springs 2 days ago, headed north. Word is they're looking for you and for me." Emma felt the blood drain from her face. "How did they know where to look?" "They don't exactly, but they know the general direction we headed." Reese paced the length of the schoolroom. "The telegram was from a friend who keeps an eye on things in Redemption Springs. He says Hopkins is claiming I kidnapped you, that the payment for your fine was stolen money." "That's absurd," Emma exclaimed. "It was your money, freely given." "Truth doesn't matter to men like Hopkins," Reese said bitterly. "What matters is power and revenge. You humiliated his son by rejecting him, and I interfered with their plans for you." Emma sank into her chair, her newfound security suddenly threatened. "What do we do?" Reese stopped pacing, his expression resolute. "You stay here. You're established now with the mayor's support and a position in the community. I'll lead them away, head east for a while, lay a false trail." "No." The force of her own objection surprised Emma. "I won't let you put yourself in danger because of me. There must be another way." "They have no legal claim on you," Reese reminded her. "The fine was paid in full with witnesses." "But they could cause trouble for you here if they find you spread rumors, undermine your position." "Then I'll face them," Emma declared, standing. "I've done nothing wrong. I won't spend my life running or hiding." Reese crossed the room in 3 quick strides, taking her hands in his. "Emma, listen to me. Men like the Hopkinses don't play by the rules. They won't confront you openly, they'll work in the shadows, turn people against you. I've seen it happen." So your solution is to draw them away, to put yourself in their sights instead. She pulled her hands free, anger rising. That's not a solution, Reese. That's just transferring the target from my back to yours. I can handle myself, he insisted. I've dealt with worse than a corrupt sheriff and a spoiled brat. And then what? Emma demanded. You spend the next months, years maybe, looking over your shoulder. Never staying in one place long enough to build a life. That's not freedom, Reese. That's just another kind of prison. Her words seemed to strike a chord. Reese turned away, bracing his hands on the teacher's desk, his shoulders tense. What would you have me do? I can't let them hurt you. Not after everything you've been through. Emma moved to stand beside him, placing a gentle hand on his arm. We face them together, she said softly. We tell the truth to Mayor Bedford, to the town council, to anyone who will listen. We get ahead of whatever lies they might spread. Reese looked at her, his expression a mixture of admiration and concern. It's risky. Once people hear about your time in chains, even if they know you were innocent, then they'll know everything, Emma interrupted. The good and the bad. And they'll make their judgments based on the whole truth, not on Elijah Hopkins's lies. For a long moment, Reese simply looked at her, something like wonder in his eyes. You're extraordinary, do you know that? He finally said. Most people would be packing their bags, ready to run. I'm tired of running, Emma admitted. Tired of letting other people dictate the course of my life. If Pine Creek is to be my home, then I want it built on honesty, not deception. Reese straightened, a new determination in his stance. All right, we'll do it your way. We'll speak to Mayor Bedford first thing tomorrow, lay out the whole story. Relief washed over Emma, followed quickly by anxiety about what the morning might bring. But having made the decision, she felt strangely at peace. There's something else we should discuss, Reese said, his tone shifting. Something I've been avoiding. What is it? Emma asked, suddenly wary. The telegram wasn't just about Hopkins and the sheriff. It also contained information about a job one I've been tracking for months. A chance to finally make things right for James Blackwell's widow and son. The man who was wrongfully hanged, Emma remembered. Reese nodded. His former partner, the one who actually committed the murder, has been spotted in Denver. The telegram confirms his location. He hesitated. I need to go after him, Emma. Need to bring him to justice, clear Blackwell's name. It won't bring him back, but it might give his family some peace. When would you leave? Emma asked, her heart sinking despite her understanding of his need for redemption. After we've dealt with Hopkins and Thornton, Reese said firmly. I won't leave you to face them alone. Emma absorbed this new information, trying to reconcile her feelings for Reese with his imminent departure. How long will you be gone? I don't know, he admitted. Could be weeks, could be months, depending on how the trail develops. And then, Emma couldn't stop herself from asking. After you've found him and cleared Blackwell's name, what then? Reese's gaze held hers, steady and unflinching. That depends on whether I have someone to come back to. The implication of his words hung in the air between them, a question and an offer combined. Emma's heart raced as she considered what he was really asking. Ask me properly, Reese Yates, she said softly. If you want an answer, ask me the question directly. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth as he took a step closer. Emma Montgomery, if I were to complete this last mission and then return to Pine Creek, would you consider building a life with me? Not as a drifter, not as a former marshal, but as a man who's found what he's been searching for without knowing it. Emma's breath caught in her throat. Are you proposing marriage, Mr. Yates? I'm proposing a beginning, he clarified. A chance for both of us to start fresh together. The details can wait until I return if you're willing. Emma considered his words carefully. Part of her wanted to demand more certainty, more concrete plans for their future. But another part, the part that had survived betrayal, imprisonment, and narrow escape, recognized the value in his honesty, in his unwillingness to make promises he might not be able to keep. "I will wait for you," she said finally. "Not as a woman suspended in time, but as one building a life that has room for you in it. When you return, if you still want that beginning, I'll be here." Relief and something like joy transformed Reese's face. He closed the distance between them, his hands coming up to frame her face with exquisite gentleness. "May I?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. Emma nodded, her heart hammering against her ribs as Reese lowered his mouth to hers. The kiss was tender at first, almost reverential, but quickly deepened into something more urgent, more passionate. Emma's arms wound around his neck as she returned the kiss with equal fervor, pouring into it all the feelings she'd been struggling to contain. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Reese rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that since I first saw you in that jail yard," he confessed. "Even in my tattered wedding dress." Emma teased, her lips still tingling from his kiss. "Especially then," he replied, his eyes darkening. "You looked like a queen, Emma, proud and unbowed despite everything they'd done to break you." Further conversation was interrupted by a sharp knock at the schoolhouse door. They sprang apart like guilty schoolchildren as Mayor Bedford entered, his usually jovial face uncharacteristically serious. "Mrs. Montgomery, Mr. Yates," he greeted them. "Pardon the intrusion, but I've just received word that we can expect visitors tomorrow, a Sheriff Thornton and Mr. Elijah Hopkins from Redemption Springs. They claim to be in pursuit of fugitives from justice." His shrewd eyes moved from Emma to Reese and back again. "I thought you might have some insight into the matter." Emma exchanged a glance with Reese, who gave her an almost imperceptible nod. Taking a deep breath, she faced the mayor squarely. "Indeed we do, Mayor Bedford," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "And I believe it's time you heard the full truth about how I came to Pine Creek." The next morning dawned clear and cool, with a crispness in the air that hinted at the approaching autumn. Emma dressed with particular care in her best borrowed dress, a deep burgundy that Marjorie Sullivan had insisted brought out the warmth in her complexion. Her conversation with Mayor Bedford the previous evening had been difficult but ultimately productive, and she felt cautiously optimistic about the day ahead. Reese was waiting for her outside her cabin, looking formidable in a clean black shirt and his most presentable trousers. The gun belt at his hip was polished, his stance alert but not tense. "Ready?" he asked simply. Emma nodded, falling into step beside him as they walked toward the center of town. Mayor Bedford had arranged for a public meeting at the courthouse, where Emma would have the opportunity to address the townsfolk directly before Sheriff Thornton and Elijah Hopkins arrived. The courthouse was already crowded when they entered, with what appeared to be most of Pine Creek's adult population in attendance. Mayor Bedford stood at the front of the room, flanked by members of the town council. He nodded gravely as Emma and Reese took their places beside him. "Ladies and gentlemen," the mayor began once the murmuring had died down, "I've called this meeting to address some rumors that may be circulating about our new school teacher, Mrs. Montgomery, and her friend, Mr. Yates. We will shortly be receiving visitors from Redemption Springs who have made certain allegations. Before they arrive, I believe Mrs. Montgomery should have the opportunity to speak for herself." He gestured for Emma to step forward. She did so on legs that felt surprisingly steady, her gaze sweeping across the assembled faces, some curious, some concerned, all attentive. "Good morning," she began, her teacher's voice carrying clearly through the room. "My name is Emma Montgomery, and until recently, I was the schoolteacher in Redemption Springs. What many of you have been told that I am a widow is not true. It was a well-intentioned deception meant to protect my reputation, but I now believe the truth is a better foundation for trust. She proceeded to explain the events that had led to her imprisonment, Elijah Hopkins's unwelcome advances, her rejection of him, the false accusation of theft, and the mockery of a trial that had followed. She described the 3 days chained in the jail yard, the abandonment by her fiancé, and finally, Reese's intervention. Mr. Yates paid a substantial fine to secure my release, she continued. Money that was legally his, despite what Sheriff Thornton and Mr. Hopkins may claim. He brought me first to friends who could vouch for my character, and then here to Pine Creek, where I hope to start a new life. She paused, looking directly at the assembled townspeople. I understand if my presence here causes concern. If you feel I am not suitable to teach your children because of these events, I will accept your judgment. But I ask only that it be based on the truth, not on lies told by men with a vendetta. A heavy silence fell over the room when she finished speaking. Emma held her head high, though her heart pounded painfully in her chest. Beside her, she could feel Reese's solid presence, ready to defend her if necessary. Mayor Bedford cleared his throat. Thank you for your honesty, Miss Montgomery. Before we open this to discussion, I should inform the town that I took the liberty of sending a telegram to Judge Peterson in Cheyenne yesterday evening, inquiring about the legal proceedings in Redemption Springs. His reply arrived this morning. He unfolded a paper from his pocket. It states, and I quote, "No legal record of trial for Emma Montgomery in Redemption Springs. If proceedings occurred, they were not sanctioned by territorial court. Fine payment received and recorded is legal tender. Case considered closed by this office." A murmur ran through the crowd at this revelation. Before it could grow louder, the courthouse doors swung open, and Sheriff Thornton strode in, followed closely by Elijah Hopkins. Both men stopped short at the sight of Emma and Reese standing at the front of the room. "Well, well," Thornton drawled, his hand hovering near his holster. "Seems we've found our fugitives." Mayor Bedford stepped forward, his substantial frame blocking the newcomer's direct path. "Sheriff Thornton, I presume, and Mr. Hopkins. You're just in time for our town meeting." "We were discussing your allegations." Thornton's eyes narrowed. "There's nothing to discuss. That woman is a thief, and that man," he jabbed a finger toward Reese, "interfered with the legal process and absconded with a prisoner." "Funny thing about legal processes," the mayor replied mildly. "They generally involve proper documentation. Judge Peterson seems to have no record of any trial for Miss Montgomery." Elijah Hopkins pushed forward, his face flushed with anger or drink, possibly both. "She stole my father's watch, a family heirloom given by President Grant himself. Is that so?" Mayor Bedford asked. "And yet, when my deputy searched your room at the hotel this morning purely as a precaution, you understand he found this." He held up a gold pocket watch. "I believe if we open it, we'll find an inscription from the president to your father." The color drained from Elijah's face. That's mine now. My father gave it to me." "Then why claim Miss Montgomery stole it?" one of the town councilmen demanded. "Why have her chained in public for 3 days over a watch that was in your possession all along?" The atmosphere in the courthouse had shifted palpably, with the townsfolk of Pine Creek now eyeing the visitors with suspicion rather than Emma. Sheriff Thornton, recognizing the turning tide, attempted a different approach. Regardless of the watch, Yates paid the fine with stolen money. He robbed the Redemption Springs Bank 2 nights before freeing the prisoner. "That's a damned lie," Reese said, speaking for the first time. His voice was cold, controlled. I haven't set foot in Redemption Springs in over a year before the day I found Miss Montgomery in chains. The gold I used was payment for tracking work I did in Montana last spring. Can you prove that? Thornton challenged. Can you prove otherwise? Mayor Bedford countered. Because I have a telegram from the Montana Territorial Marshal's office confirming Mr. Yates received payment of $600 in gold for the capture of the Wallace brothers in April of this year. Emma glanced at Reese in surprise. He hadn't mentioned contacting his former colleagues for verification. He gave her a slight nod, his focus never wavering from Thornton and Hopkins. Thornton's hand twitched toward his gun, but a subtle shift in the room stopped him. Several of Pine Creek's men had moved to strategic positions, their own weapons within easy reach. I suggest, Mayor Bedford said pleasantly, that you gentlemen return to Redemption Springs and inform Mayor Hopkins that his son's false accusations have been exposed. Miss Montgomery is now under the protection of Pine Creek, and any further harassment will be met with the full force of territorial law. This isn't over, Elijah Hopkins snarled, his face contorted with rage. You think you're safe here, Emma? My father's influence reaches further than you know. That sounds remarkably like a threat, Mr. Hopkins, Reese observed, his hand now resting openly on his holster. You might want to reconsider your words. A tense silence fell over the courthouse as Elijah glared at Reese, clearly weighing his options. Sheriff Thornton, showing more wisdom than his companion, placed a restraining hand on Elijah's arm. "Come on, Hopkins," he muttered. "We're outnumbered here." For a moment, it seemed Elijah might resist, but finally, he allowed himself to be led from the courthouse, throwing one last venomous look at Emma as he departed. The collective tension in the room dissipated as the door closed behind them. Mayor Bedford turned to address the assembled townsfolk. "Well, that was enlightening," he remarked dryly. "Now, I believe we were discussing our new schoolteacher's position. Does anyone have any objections to Miss Montgomery continuing in her role, given what we've learned today?" Emma held her breath as she scanned the faces before her. To her surprise and relief, she saw not condemnation but sympathy and respect in many eyes. Harriet Bedford was the first to speak. "I think we've all seen evidence of Miss Montgomery's character today, her courage in facing her accusers and her honesty in sharing the truth with us. I, for one, would be proud to have her teach my grandchildren." "Hear, hear," came several voices from the crowd. "Then it's settled," Mayor Bedford declared with evident satisfaction. "Miss Montgomery remains our schoolteacher with the full support of this community." He turned to Emma. "School begins on Monday as planned, young lady. And don't worry about Hopkins and his cronies. Pine Creek takes care of its own." The meeting dissolved into smaller conversations as people came forward to express their support to Emma. Several mothers assured her they would still be sending their children to school, while the town's doctor offered to check her wrists, which still bore faint marks from the shackles through it all. Reese remained at her side, a quiet, steadying presence. Only when the courthouse had mostly emptied did he speak. "You did well," he said softly. "I'm proud of you." "We did well," Emma corrected him. "I couldn't have faced them alone." "Yes, you could have," Reese countered. "You're stronger than you know, Emma Montgomery." Mayor Bedford approached them, satisfaction evident in his bearing. "That went better than I dared hope," he admitted. "I've sent men to escort our visitors to the town limits and make sure they continue on their way." "Thank you, Mayor," Emma said sincerely, "for everything. No need for thanks. Pine Creek protects its own, as I said." He glanced at Reese. "Though I suspect our new schoolteacher will have additional protection for some time to come." Reese cleared his throat. "Actually, sir, I need to discuss that with you." I have an obligation in Denver that I must fulfill, one that can't be postponed now that I have the information I need." The mayor's bushy eyebrows rose. "I see. And will you be returning to Pine Creek afterward?" "If I'm welcome," Reese replied, his eyes finding Emma's. "I have reason to believe there might be a place for me here." Mayor Bedford looked between them, a knowing smile spreading across his face. "Well now, I believe the town could use a man with your skills, Mr. Yates. Perhaps as a deputy marshal, once you've concluded your business in Denver. We've been meaning to establish a proper law office here, with the mine bringing in more people every month." Emma's heart leapt at the suggestion. A permanent position would give Reese a reason to return, a place in the community beyond his connection to her. "I'd be honored to consider it," Reese said carefully, "though I should be clear that my past contains elements that some might find problematic." "We all have pasts, Mr. Yates," the mayor replied sagely. "It's what we do with our futures that matters most. Think on it while you're away." He patted Reese on the shoulder before departing, leaving them alone in the now empty courthouse. "A deputy marshal," Emma mused when they were alone. "It would suit you." "Perhaps," Reese acknowledged, "though I gave up the badge for good reason." "This would be different," Emma pointed out. "You'd be serving a community, not chasing fugitives across territories." Reese's expression softened as he looked at her. "You're already planning my return, aren't you?" "Someone has to," she replied with a smile that didn't quite hide her anxiety about his departure. "When will you leave?" "Tomorrow morning," he said, his expression turning serious. "The trail is already cold. I can't delay any longer if I hope to find Blackwell's true killer." Emma nodded, fighting against the disappointment that threatened to overwhelm her. "I understand. This is something you need to do." Reese stepped closer, taking her hands in his. "I will come back, Emma. No matter how long it takes, no matter what I find in Denver, I will come back to you." "I believe you," she said softly. And she did, with a certainty that surprised her given how briefly they'd known each other. Something fundamental had connected them from that first moment in the jail yard, a recognition of kindred spirits, perhaps, or simply the alignment of two lives at precisely the right moment. "Tonight," Reese said, his voice low and intimate, "I'd like to take you to dinner at the hotel. A proper dinner, not as fugitives or as teacher and escort, but as a man and woman who care for each other. Will you join me?" "I'd be delighted," Emma replied, her heart lightening despite the knowledge of his imminent departure. That evening, Emma dressed in the green calico that had become her favorite of the borrowed dresses, arranging her hair with special care. When Reese knocked at her door, she found him similarly prepared for the occasion, wearing a clean white shirt beneath his usual vest, his hair neatly combed. "You look beautiful," he said simply, offering his arm. The hotel dining room had been prepared for them with obvious care, a corner table set with the establishment's best linen and china, a small vase of wildflowers as a centerpiece. The other diners watched with undisguised interest as Reese seated Emma, but their gazes held approval rather than suspicion. "It seems we're the evening's entertainment," Emma observed with a small smile. "Small town curiosity," Reese replied, unperturbed. "They'll find something else to gossip about soon enough." They enjoyed a surprisingly excellent meal of roast beef, potatoes, and fresh bread, the conversation flowing easily between them. Reese shared stories of his time as a marshal that were lighthearted enough for a dinner table, while Emma spoke of her years teaching in Boston and her initial adjustment to life in the West. "I never imagined myself here," she admitted as they lingered over coffee and apple pie. "Growing up in Boston, I had visions of marrying a professor like my father, hosting literary salons, living a very proper, very predictable life." "Do you regret the path that led you west?" Reese asked. Emma considered the question seriously. "No," she said finally. "Despite the hardships, perhaps even because of them, I've discovered strengths in myself I never knew existed. And I've met people I would never have encountered in my Boston drawing rooms." She gave him a meaningful look. People like disreputable former marshals who rescue damsels in distress. Reese suggested with a hint of self-deprecation. People like honorable men who risk everything to right wrongs and protect those who can't protect themselves. Emma corrected gently. A shadow crossed Reese's face. "I'm not as honorable as you think, Emma. I've done things in the name of justice that haunt me still." "We all carry regrets," she said. "What matters is how we choose to live with them, whether we let them define us or drive us to be better." Reese studied her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "How did you become so wise, Emma Montgomery?" "I had excellent teachers," she replied with a small smile. "Hardship chief among them." After dinner, they walked slowly back to Emma's cabin, the night air cool against their skin. The town was quiet, with only the occasional light glowing from a window and the distant piano from the saloon breaking the silence. At her door, Emma turned to face Reese, reluctant for the evening to end. "What time will you leave tomorrow?" "Dawn," he replied. "I want to cover as much ground as possible while the trail is still somewhat fresh." Emma nodded, fighting against the tightness in her throat. "Then I should say goodbye now. I wouldn't want to delay your departure in the morning." "Emma." Reese's voice was rough with emotion as he reached for her, drawing her into his arms with a gentleness that belied his strength. "This isn't goodbye. It's just until we meet again." She raised her face to his, memorizing every detail: the lines at the corners of his eyes, the small scar near his right temple, the way his hair curled slightly at his collar. "Be careful," she whispered, "and come back to me." "Wild horses couldn't keep me away," he promised, before lowering his mouth to hers in a kiss that spoke of longing, of promise, and of a future yet to be written. When they finally parted, both breathing heavily, Reese rested his forehead against hers. "I need to go," he murmured, "or I won't be able to leave at all." "I know," Emma replied, forcing herself to step back. "Godspeed, Reese Yates. I'll be waiting when you return." With a final, lingering look, Reese turned and walked away into the darkness, his tall figure gradually disappearing from view. Emma watched until she could see him no longer, then entered her cabin alone, already counting the days until his return. The weeks following Reese's departure passed in a blur of activity for Emma. The school term began as scheduled, with 28 children of varying ages and abilities filling the classroom. The challenges of teaching such a diverse group occupied her days completely, leaving little time for loneliness or worry. Pine Creek proved to be everything she had hoped for in a community. The townsfolk had embraced her completely after the confrontation with Thornton and Hopkins, with many going out of their way to make her feel welcome and protected. Harriet Bedford had taken Emma under her wing, including her in social gatherings and introducing her to the town's various circles. Each evening, Emma wrote in her journal, recording the day's events and her thoughts for Reese to read when he returned. It became a ritual that helped her feel connected to him despite the distance between them. News came sporadically: a telegram in the third week informing her that he had arrived in Denver and picked up the trail. Another 2 weeks later saying he was heading to Pueblo in pursuit of his quarry. Then silence for nearly a month, leaving Emma to alternate between worry and faith that he was simply unable to communicate. The autumn colors had fully arrived, painting the surrounding hills in golds and reds, when Mayor Bedford appeared at the schoolhouse door one afternoon just as Emma was dismissing her students. "Miss Montgomery," he called, waving a telegram. "News from Denver." Emma's heart leapt as she hurried to meet him, the children scattering to their homes around her. "From Reese?" she asked breathlessly. "Not directly," the mayor replied, handing her the paper. "From the territorial marshal's office. Read for yourself." With trembling fingers, Emma unfolded the telegram. James Blackwell case reopened. Stop true killer captured Santa Fe. Stop full confession obtained. Stop Blackwell name cleared. Stop Yates instrumental in capture. Stop returning to Pine Creek within fortnight. Stop Emma. Read the words 3 times. Joy and relief washing over her in equal measure. "He did it," she whispered. "He found the real killer. And cleared an innocent man's name," Mayor Bedford added approvingly. "That's the mark of a man of integrity, Miss Montgomery." "Yes," Emma agreed, carefully folding the telegram and tucking it into her pocket. "Yes, it is." The following 2 weeks seemed to crawl by at an agonizing pace. Emma threw herself into preparations for the Harvest Festival, volunteering to coordinate the children's performances and helping Harriet Bedford with the decorations for the town square. On the morning of the festival, Emma was directing a group of older boys in hanging lanterns from the trees when a familiar figure on horseback appeared at the edge of the square. Her breath caught in her throat as Reese dismounted, his eyes finding hers immediately across the bustling space. He looked thinner, more weathered than when he'd left, with a new scar visible along his jawline. But his eyes, those remarkable blue eyes, still held the same warmth, the same intensity when they rested on her. Emma handed her basket of lanterns to one of the boys and made her way through the crowd, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain everyone could hear it. They met in the center of the square, oblivious to the curious glances of the townsfolk around them. "You're back," Emma said simply, drinking in the sight of him. "I promised I would be," Reese replied, his voice rough with emotion. Without caring who might see, Emma threw her arms around his neck, and Reese caught her close, lifting her off her feet in an embrace that spoke volumes about the depth of his feelings. When he set her down, both were smiling despite the tears in Emma's eyes. "I have so much to tell you," he said, keeping one arm around her waist as if afraid she might disappear. "And I want to hear every word," Emma assured him. "But first, I believe Mayor Bedford is waiting to speak with you about a certain position." Reese glanced toward the courthouse, where the mayor stood watching them with undisguised satisfaction. "Ah, yes, the deputy marshal job. I've given it considerable thought during my travels." "And," Emma prompted, trying to keep her tone neutral despite the hope bubbling within her. Reese's expression grew serious. "I've spent 2 years running from my past, Emma, from my mistakes, from the badge, from the responsibility that comes with it. But these past months tracking Blackwell's killer, I realized something important." "What's that?" she asked softly. "That sometimes the best way to make amends for past errors isn't to run from them, but to do better going forward. To use what I've learned, what I know how to do, in service of people who deserve protection." He took a deep breath. "I'm going to accept the position if it's still available. Pine Creek needs law enforcement as it grows, and I need a home." Joy flooded through Emma at his words. "And have you found one?" "A home?" Reese's eyes held hers, his meaning unmistakable. "I believe I have, if the offer still stands." "It does," Emma assured him, her voice catching. "It always will." Before he could respond, Mayor Bedford approached, hand extended in welcome. "Yates, good to see you back in one piece. Heard you did some fine work in Santa Fe." "Thank you, sir," Reese replied, shaking the mayor's hand firmly. "I understand you might have a position available for a man with my experience." "Indeed we do," Bedford confirmed heartily. "Town council approved the creation of a marshal's office last month. Pay's not extravagant, but it includes living quarters above the office and the respect of a growing community. I'd be honored to accept, Reese said without hesitation, though I should mention I have one additional matter to settle first. He turned back to Emma, reaching into his pocket to withdraw a small leather pouch. Miss Montgomery, I've had plenty of time to think during my travels, about what I want, about what matters most in this life. Emma's heart began to race as Reese took her hand in his. I left here with a promise to return, but without making the commitment you deserve, he continued, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his eyes. I'd like to remedy that now, if you're willing. From the pouch, he produced a simple gold ring set with a small, perfect diamond. Emma's breath caught as he dropped to one knee before her, heedless of the growing crowd of onlookers. Emma Montgomery, would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife? Not because you need protection, or because I need redemption, but because I love you with every fiber of my being and can't imagine facing another day without you by my side. Tears blurred Emma's vision as she looked down at this man, who had saved her in every way a person could be saved. Yes, she whispered, then louder, yes, Reese Yates, I will marry you. A cheer went up from the assembled townsfolk as Reese slid the ring onto Emma's finger, then rose to gather her in his arms once more. Their kiss, witnessed by what seemed to be the entire population of Pine Creek, sealed a promise born in the unlikeliest of circumstances: a bride in chains, a man seeking redemption, and the freedom they had found together. 6 months later, on a perfect spring day, Emma Montgomery became Emma Yates in a ceremony performed in the Pine Creek Church. The schoolchildren formed an honor guard, strewing flower petals in the bride's path as she walked down the aisle to where Reese waited, resplendent in a new suit, and wearing an expression of such joy it brought tears to the eyes of even the most stoic attendees. Among the guests were the Sullivans, who had made the journey from their ranch to witness the union they had helped facilitate. Tom Sullivan stood as Reese's best man, while Sarah Sullivan served as Emma's maid of honor. Mayor Bedford, in his capacity as Justice of the Peace, performed the ceremony with evident pleasure. "Dearly beloved," he began, his voice carrying through the packed church, "we are gathered here today to witness the union of two souls who found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances. A testament, if you will, to the power of justice, courage, and love to transform even the darkest of situations into blessings." As Emma and Reese exchanged their vows, the gold band that had once symbolized a union founded on convenience was replaced by one representing a love forged through adversity and built on mutual respect and admiration. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Mayor Bedford declared as the ceremony concluded. "Marshal Yates, you may kiss your bride." Reese needed no second invitation. He gathered Emma into his arms with a tenderness that belied his strength, his kiss a promise of all the years to come. The church erupted in applause as they turned to face their friends and neighbors no longer as teacher and lawman, but as husband and wife. Their separate journeys now merged into one shared path. The celebration that followed lasted well into the night, with the entire town joining in the festivities. Dancing, feasting, and much good-natured teasing filled the hours until, at last, the newlyweds slipped away to the new home they would share, a modest but comfortable house on the edge of town, close enough for Emma to walk to the school each morning, and for Reese to respond quickly to any disturbances requiring the marshal's attention. As they stood on the porch of their home, the sounds of continued celebration drifting from the town square, Reese drew Emma into his arms once more. "Happy, Mrs. Yates?" he asked, his voice tender in the darkness. "Happier than I ever thought possible," she replied, leaning into his embrace. though I still can't quite believe how we found each other." "I've stopped questioning the how," Reese admitted, his lips brushing her temple. "Some things defy explanation. I'm just grateful that I happened to ride into Redemption Springs on the day you needed me most." "As am I," Emma murmured, turning in his arms to face him. "Though I maintain it wasn't mere chance that brought you there." "Oh," Reese raised an eyebrow. "What was it then, in your scholarly opinion?" Emma smiled, reaching up to trace the line of his jaw with gentle fingers. "Fate, destiny, divine intervention. Take your pick. All I know is that I was chained in that jail yard without hope or future, and then there you were, my salvation, riding in on a chestnut stallion." "If I recall correctly," Reese said with a slow smile, "it was you who saved me, Emma Yates. I was a man without purpose, without home, without peace. You gave me all three." As the moon rose over Pine Creek, casting silver light across the land that had become their home, Emma and Reese Yates stepped across the threshold of their new life together, a life built not on the ashes of their separate pasts, but on the promise of a shared future, bound by a love that had begun in the most unlikely of places and flourished against all odds. And in the years that followed, as their family grew to include first a son with his father's blue eyes and later a daughter with her mother's quiet determination, as Pine Creek prospered and expanded under the careful guidance of its marshal and schoolteacher, as the story of their unusual meeting became local legend, Emma and Reese never forgot the journey that had brought them together. A bride in shackles, a cowboy with gold, and the freedom they had found in each other's arms.